So you worked at the American Heart Association in an admin role, and then you worked in a Daystar Center, the community arts and culture. There's definitely a non-profit angle for a lot of the stuff that you've, especially the early stuff that you've done. What drove you to that?
Yeah, I've always been a kind of activist at heart. I forced my parents to recycle when I was in junior high. I've always wanted to make the world a better place, save the rainforest, save the whales. I, grew up in that mentality. And so when I left college, I'd already worked for some nonprofits during college part-time. And I thought, this is how we change the world in the nonprofit sector. So I loved my time at the Heart Association. I had amazing bosses, managers that were poured into me. It was really great. If people are looking for a great corporate track, I highly recommend American Heart Association as a nonprofit. There's a really awesome way that they work there. And it was good. I felt like I was changing what I raised. I was an assistant to the grant writer, and then I became a grant writer. And personally, I wrote grants that raised $300,000 toward work in Chicago, as well as funding research around the United States to combat heart disease and strokes. And I felt really fulfilled. It was great until I went to my first site visit. I was taking the funders of the grant to the site in a lower income neighborhood in Chicago to show them, here's the programming that you helped us do. And I realized at that point that I wanted to be in the community doing the programming, not getting the money from the resourced people and telling the unresourced people what to do. And that was what ultimately led me to leave the Heart Association and really strike out on my own. We were starting our own business, and in the same building was the Daystar Center. I started volunteering with them, knowing the more people come to yoga classes or come to do music lessons, so those kind of things, the more they're going to buy coffee. Our business is a coffee shop. And then over time, I ended up becoming their director of operations because I had that business mindset to bring to the table. And it was really fulfilling, really great work. Lots of kids learned how to play piano, and who knows how that's going to help them with math and all kinds of problem solving over time. But the main thing that I loved about my role there was this was a community that was pretty new. 2007, it was the fastest growing neighborhood in the United States that we were located in. And so there weren't these places for people to gather and institutions to build the community. It's kind of like people live next to each other, but no one knew each other. And that's really what we were. And that bringing people together, having them interact with each other, I realized like building community is really, it's not just about in one-to-one having a conversation, but about facilitating conversations amongst groups of people from different backgrounds. That's how change really happens. And so that's what we really tried to foster there. And it was really awesome. I'm really fulfilled by that work. I think there needs to be more of that happening. I applaud people that do that. Part of what we're doing here, we're having a conversation, but there's a whole other group of people listening to this, and hopefully they'll reach out to us and they'll talk to us, and we can build community all over the world. And it kind of started in that little small coffee shop lobby.
Yeah, we'll talk about your business, the Overflow Coffee Bar. I just want to touch on something. So the notes that you shared with me, you talk about being, you describe yourself as a millennial.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think as a millennial you have a different view on previous generations on business, on not-for-profit community, the ecology, the environment? Do you think you have a distinctly different view as a millennial?
I think there has been this, they call it like kind of waves of business. You had with the Industrial Revolution, you had the commoditization wave, where you could actually make products available to everybody. If using coffee as an example, you could have coffee widespread everywhere and might not be good, but it was least available. And then you had the next wave, Folgers, that kind of put it, or no, actually that's the first wave is like Folgers in a can. Everybody could use it. Second wave was kind of like the Star Schmucks who took the coffee and tried to make it good and still widely available. Then you had the third wave, which was thinking about not just good, but unique, handcrafted artisan coffee.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that. I think there's some really great, we would never had third wave if we hadn't had the first two. But then there's also this kind of newer wave that's saying, well, let's not just have good coffee. Let's have sustainably sourced coffee that's doing good for the coffee farmers and for the planet. And that's where we kind of fit in. We used a small micro roaster, made sure it was artisan, handcrafted, but it was also well researched and made sure the farmer was paid well for his work, as well as, cutting out the middlemen that often took that profits that didn't end up with the farmer. And then you could do that with the blueberries and the blueberry muffins and the butter and the milk and, all the things that we would use. We would try to look at the sourcing there. And I think that's not something that just millennials are doing. But like I said earlier, I grew up watching Save the Whale documentaries, and we would buy a chunk of the rainforest in elementary school as a class. That mentality has been baked into us. And I think we're driving some of businesses need to think about that triple bottom line that they call it, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think it's just us that's doing it. I know plenty of boomers and Xers that are, in that same vein, and plenty of younger folks that are doing even more than us millennials would.
Really interesting. Yeah. So you worked you were co-owner of Overflow Coffee Bar. So what was this? Where was it? How many did you just have? One store? Did you have multiple stores?
Yeah, we just had one store. It was on State Street in Chicago. If you're familiar with the city, it was kind of close to Museum Campus, a mile from Soldier Field where the Chicago Bears play, right in the midst of Columbia College, which is an art school there, as well as a bunch of other universities. And we had a lot of fun with it. We were kind of naive, didn't know any better in terms of that we could actually start it. We started with zero assets. We actually were in debt. We still owed our student loans. My husband and I were the co-founders.
Okay.
And we figured out how to make it happen. And it was quite a journey.